it is Hey Teves, and I want to talk a little bit about the Yom Tov of Hey Teves, and we in Chabad is called the Yom Tov of the Dan Natzach, of the we were victorious. So what I want to do is actually tell a little bit of the story that happened that made this day a very, very, very special day. It was in 1945. I'm going to make the story short and sweet, okay? It was in 1945, 1985. 1985, the previous Rebbe had a library. Part of it was upstairs on the second floor of 770, where the previous Rebbe lived, and he had a big library there. Then there was a library of the previous Rebbe in the basement. But they started noticing that some books were beginning to were missing. They noticed that there was just the bookcases were full of books. And they started noticing in various different places in the bookcases upstairs in the previous Rebbe's house that there were spaces. And it became a very odd thing. We're like, what's going on? Why are there spaces? That means somebody's taking books. So he installed a camera, and they found out that it was the previous Rebbe's grandson. His name is Barry Garari, who was taking books. Okay. Now, what was his thing behind it? He said it's a very important thing in the story to understand what the story is, to understand the spiritual aspect of the story. Now, let me just give another introduction. The previous Rebbe didn't have any sons. The previous Rebbe had 3 daughters. Okay? The oldest daughter was Chana, who married the Rashag. The last name was Chana Garari, who was the mother of Barry. They had 1 son. Then there was Chaim Mushke, the Rebbe's Rebbitzin, and the Rebbe, and they had no children. The 3rd daughter, whose name was Shena, she was married to a guy by the name of Mendel Hornstein, and they were killed by the Nazis. Okay? So from the previous Rebbe's family, 2 daughters and their husbands remained alive, but there was only 1 grandchild from the previous Rebbe's family. Now, this grandchild maintained, he was hard up for money, and he maintained that, listen, the previous Rebbe's library, he has 2 daughters, they're both getting it. I'm a son of that daughter, so half of it's mine. My mother's part of it. And therefore, he went around and he started taking books and he started selling them, but he was very, very expensive books, and he did it very discreetly. He had access to the room. He would go and walk out with a brown paper bag as if nothing happened with it. It was a whole mishmash of what happened. To make a long story short, Rabbanim said he can go to court because he wouldn't go listen to the Rabbanim. They could take it to court. He went to court it was spring of 1985. They went to court, and there was a big court case, okay? And there's a lot, I don't want to get into all the details. If you go on Chabad.org, you'll see there's tons of information written on it, and there's books, the story of Hey Teves. I mean, there's a lot of, I would just want to get to the Farbrengen aspect of it, of what we learned from it. They went to court, and the Rebbe said 2 things. Generally, the Rebbe didn't even though the Rebbe did meet with the lawyers, but the Rebbe left it up to the Chassidim. During the court case, every day, the Rebbe went to court. The Rebbe went to the oil, he went to the oil, to the grave of the previous Rebbe. There was one letter that the Rebbe was told about, that the previous Rebbe wrote to a certain doctor that he was trying to get his books from Europe. He was trying to get his books back. And the previous Rebbe writes in that letter They're not my books. They're the community, the nation's books. They're the Chassidim's books. They're not mine. Okay, and the Rebbe said they should use that letter in court to show the judge that they're not personal books. What Chabad was arguing then, and what the Rebbe wanted, that it's not the previous Rebbe's books. It belonged to the Hasidim. It belonged to the Hasidim. And therefore, this person has no right to come and take and say it's an inheritance because they were private books. They weren't private books. They were books that belonged to the Hasidim, and the Hasidim never died. They continue living. And the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe in the spiritual way, is also continuing to live. So he has no right to the books. So the Rebbe said they should take that letter and they should show it in court, use it as verification that the previous Rebbe said these books are not mine, it's not my individual property, it is the Hasidim, and therefore he has no right to them. They ended up, I mean, again, the court case went on for a year, there was a lot of things going on. They deposed that a deposition of the Rebbe Chaim Mushka, and the Rebbe pushed that the Rebbe Chaim Mushka should be deposed and give a deposition. And they gave a deposition in her house, in the Rebbe's house in President Street. There are lawyers from both sides. It was recorded, you know, the way the deposition is recorded for anybody who knows anything about court. And at the end of the deposition, the other side's lawyers asked the Rebbetzin the following question. Who does the books belong to? To who does the books belong? The Rebbetzin said, the books belong to the Hasidim because my father belonged to the Hasidim. This is what the Rebbe spoke about after she passed away. The Rebbe spoke about his wife, the Rebbetzin, and he spoke about this thing, that the Rebbetzin said that not only do the books belong to the Hasidim, but my father belonged to the Hasidim. And when both sides, the attorneys of the other side, heard that, they dropped the pencils, like, oh my God, we're out of here. We're lost. Because his own daughter, the previous Rebbe's own daughter, testified that her father, so they asked her afterwards, by the way, so what did your father own? What did your father, the Rebbe, own? And the Rebbetzin said the only thing he owned was his talis and tefillin. That's the only thing that my father owned. Everything else belonged to Chassidim. And even when they played over the deposition in court, listen to this, when they played over that deposition in court, the judge is supposed to be impartial, was overheard saying, when he heard the deposition, he said, remarkable. That's remarkable. Anyway, so what happened, to make a long story short, on Teves, the courts ruled that the books belong to the Chassidim, and he has no right to take the books, and he had to give back all the books, and those books that he sold, the Chassidim, the Rebbe bought them back from the people that bought them, that nobody should have any losses of money. The Rebbe bought back all the books, and all the books were brought back. Now, the Rebbe said it at Farbrengen. It's interesting because I want to bring out what we need to learn from all of this. Rebbe, everybody knows the song. That started when the Rebbe said Didan Natzach. But the Rebbe said there's a medrash. There's a medrash that says, what's the origin of the word Didan Natzach, which means we won. But what is the origin of that Didan Natzach? So there's a medrash in Vayikra Rabbah. It says like this. I'm going to read it because it's brought down in English. Rabbi Brachi said in the name of Rabbi Shimon, it once happened in our town that Rabbi Yosef Shusterman was sitting and studying at the mouth of a fountain. A certain spirit that dwelled there appeared to him. In those days, spirits were still, the shadim, the demons were still around. And he said to him, You know that for many years I've been dwelling here and protected this river and area. This is what the demon is telling you. You and your wives used to come and go evening and morning and were never hurt. Now you're up to know, you need to know that a certain evil spirit desires to take up his abode here and he's going to hurt people. So he said to him, what should we do to stop this evil spirit? He said like this, the spirit said to him, go and warn the townspeople and say to them, whoever has a hoe, whoever has a shovel, whoever has a spade, all sorts of noise-making equipment, should all come here tomorrow at the break of day and watch the surface of the water. When they notice a disturbance in the water, let them strike the irons together and make a big commotion and scream, Di da Notzach, we won. Okay, they should scream Di da Notzach. And they should not go away until they notice a clot of blood on the surface of the water. So that's what they did. And they said, Di da Natzach, and they saw the blood. And from that day on, there was no more problems. So the Rebbe's, when the Rebbe quoted this medrash, the Rebbe said, victory is dependent on people making noise. What type of noise are we talking about? Every Jew has a godly soul and an animal soul. Okay, and there's this evil force that wants to come and destroy the godly soul. So you need to take, the Yetzer Tov wants to save us. How do you defeat and nullify the evil spirit? When Jews come together and they have implements of noise making, meaning holy instruments, to make noise of Kedusha, sounds of Kedusha, screaming Didan Natzach, then we know that we're victorious. Okay? But let's discuss a little bit. That's the basic thing. So therefore it became, and then they appealed it. They lost the appeal. The appellate judges said, based on that letter that the previous Rebbe wrote, that the Sfarim don't belong to me, they belong to the community. They threw out the appeal, and the Sfarim were brought back, base Kislev, to 7-7. Now let's understand. No, there's not one book that, to my understand, every single book was returned. Now let's understand what actually is going on over here. There's something spiritual. The Rebbe spoke about it. It was screaming because this person said, this grandson said, my grandfather died years ago. He's not here anymore. He's not here for many, many, many years. He's out of the picture. The Rebbe screamed, how can you say that about a tzaddik? The Zohar says that a tzaddik, when they pass away, are even more alive. They're even more alive than when they're alive. Because when a tzaddik is alive, the tzaddik is limited in a body. He has to eat, he has to sleep. He can't be in two places at the same time. He's in a body. When a tzaddik passes away, and the primary life of the tzaddik is not his body, rather the primary life of the tzaddik is his soul, and the soul is not restricted anymore by a body. So of course the soul is much greater now. Just because we don't see him doesn't mean the soul is not much more revealed now than it was before. But what is, hey Teves, remember we said Yutas Kissa, we are learning it's a decree against Chassidus. Yubes Tammuz was against spreading Yiddishkeit in Russia. We explained Rosh Chodesh Kissa when we Farbrengen, the heart of the Rebbe, what tried stopping the Rebbe. Hey Teves is a very unique thing, and the Rebbe said it himself in the Sichos. Not about himself. He was talking about the Frierdiker Rebbe, but it's really about the Rebbe. The Rebbe said this was a battle in a few areas. Number one, the Rebbe said, if the fight is against books, that means Hashem is telling us we're not learning enough. If there's a fight against Jewish books. What is Hashem trying to tell us? How do we repair that? How do we rectify the situation? We need Pasha to sit and learn more books. Every Jewish home should have books. And the Rebbe said, and hey Teves, people should go the day, and hey Teves, you should buy Jewish books in your home. Because if the decree was against books, we rectify it by learning more books, by buying more books, obviously Torah books, Jewish Torah books, and we should do more in the way of learning and davening and having books in the home. It's very important for a home to have Jewish books. I want to tell you something. When I came, a personal story. When we came to LA, it was 1978. So I don't know, maybe it was beginning of 79. There was a kid, a guy, now he was married, much older than me. He learned in my father's Hebrew school in Chicago. Okay, when he was 12, 10, 11, he was bar mitzvahed in my father's shul in Chicago. You're talking in the early 60s, maybe even before that. Okay. And I come to this out, when I really found out, he wanted to sell a life insurance policy. Okay. But he showed me, we were meeting him in his house. I thought, okay, a guy that went to school in my father's Hebrew school, where I'm my father's son, he wants to see me. Anyway, but he showed me in the bookcase, there was the Talks and Tales, individual Talks and Tales that used to come up monthly. And this is like, who knows how many years later, and he has it in his bookcase. And he said, every so often, my kids, who by then married, would come and pull it out from the shelf and read the story and read something about the parsha, read something about the Torah. You can never know. You have books in the home. The Rebbe once said, the real furniture of a Jewish home is books. What's the real furniture? What decorates a Jewish home? It's not the couches and the dining rooms and the bedroom. What actually decorates a Jewish home? A Jewish home is decorated by Torah books, by Jewish books, Torah books. The Rebbe said, if the decree was against learning and because it was against Torah books, if the decree was against learning and against having books, so people and hey Teves need to buy books. And Rebbe said not to buy books just to stick in the shelf. To learn from the books. I mentioned the story in the past. When the Rebbe Marash, the fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe, was a little boy, he learned a lot of Mishnayos by heart. And he used to get money for it. He would learn Mishnayos by heart, as kids do in school, and he would get money from his father. And he collected a lot, he learned a lot of Mishnayos by heart, and he collected a lot of money. And his passion as a kid even was to buy books. Whenever a bookseller came to the city of Lubavitch, the shtetl, the small village of Lubavitch, he would come to his father, the Tzemach Tzedek, and said, Father, Abba, the bookseller is in town, I want to buy books. One year, he came to the Tzemach Tzedek. He was a kid, or a teenager maybe. And he said, and the Tzemach Tzedek had a massive, massive library. Okay? He came to his father and said, Father, the bookseller's in town. I want to buy more books. So his father, the Tzemach Tzedek, said to him, all the books you have by heart. All the Sfarim you have, by heart. He said to his father, and all the Sfarim you have, by heart. So his father, the Tzemach Tzedek, said to him, you know what? Test me. He went to the shelf. He took out not a famous book. He took out a little book, and it happened to be a diktuk book, Jewish grammar book, a Torah Jewish grammar book. And he opens it up, and Tzemach Tzedek says, "Get them by heart." And every book that he did, his father knew by heart. So he says, "Okay, you." The kid says to the father, "Okay, you won." The father smiles and said, "Here, take the money and go buy the books." The Rebbe said it's not enough to have books, but if you just want to have for the bookcase, you can books. They sell just covers. You don't have to buy the book. You just buy the cover, it will decorate your shelf. Nobody will know the difference. The Rebbe wanted that in Teves, people should buy Svarim and learn Svarim. Everybody should buy, the men, the women, the children. They should buy books, Svarim, and they should actually learn from the Svarim. But let's take this in a little bit of a deeper level. What Teves is why it's such a very important day in the Jewish calendar. Throughout Jewish history, there are decrees against Jewish people. Hanukkah was a decree against the Jewish people. Purim was a decree against the Jewish people. The Inquisition was a decree. The Holocaust. There's decrees constantly against the Jewish people. When we are victorious over the Kitrug, as it's called, decrees, so that means in heaven, they agree that this is the way it's supposed to be. Like we learned about Yutis Kislev, right? There was as Chassidus explains, there was a decree against disseminating of Chassidic philosophy. Because until those years, it wasn't disseminated to the masses. A scholar, a great person, a holy person would learn Chassidus. The typical masses were not learning Chassidus. And there was a decree against the Alter Rebbe started disseminating Chassidus. And there was a decree against the Alter Rebbe for disseminating Chassidus. So what happened when Yutas Kislev happened, that Alter Rebbe was released from prison, it wasn't a physical thing. It wasn't a physical decree that he was sending money to Turkey, to the Jew. I'm sorry, he's sending money to the Jews in Israel, which happened to be under Turkish rule, and Turkey was fighting with Russia at that time. So they snitched on the Alter Rebbe that he's supporting the enemy of Russia. When the Alter Rebbe was really sending tzedakah to the Jews, to the poor Jews that were living in Israel, in Eretz Yisrael. But spiritually, why did Hashem make it happen? That Alter Rebbe was put into prison. And as the Rebbe Rashab said, we discussed this, Yutas Kislev, the olive, when you torture it, then it gives the oil, which is the essence of everything. So when there's a decree against Chassidus, and there's a Yutas Kislev celebration, that means in heaven, they decreed that Chassidus could and should be disseminated. Okay, in heaven, they agreed to that. What happened, Teves, and the Rebbe alluded to that really, it was against not Chassidus, it wasn't against Chassidim, it was a decree questioning what is a Rebbe. Is a Rebbe an individual human being? Like this grandchild, Barry Garari, said the Rebbe was a human being and he had children and he died, and therefore there's inheritance 50-50. My mother and the Rebbe's in Chaim Moshka 50-50. The other daughter was killed by the Nazis, as we said, and therefore I'm the only child of my parents, and therefore I have a right to the books. And the decree was at that time what it defines a Rebbe from being a Rebbe. Is a Rebbe just a regular human being that happens to be a leader of Chassidim? Or is the Rebbe the essence of Chassidim and it's the same thing? And it went to court. It went to court. When the judge made a ruling that the books didn't belong to the Rebbe as a person, the books belonged to the Chassidim, that means in the earthly court, and the judge was not a Jew, by the way. He was a very nice guy, Sutton, but he was Judge Sutton, but he wasn't a Jew. And he didn't have any free choice, because the guy doesn't have free choice unless if it's pertaining to the 7 Noahide laws. The judge ruled in court, that means by the law of the world, the law of the land, that what is the definition of a Rebbe? He and the Chassidim are one. I want to explain this in a simple way to the people should understand a concept that a difficulty about a Rebbe, especially in Chabad, that worldly people, are have an issue with the concept of a Rebbe. And I think this is really what Teves is really all about, to understand what is a Rebbe. Many people will come along, especially in non-Chabad circles. And if you're in Chabad circles, you hear it from non-Chabad people. Why are you guys worshiping the Rebbe? You worship him. You don't do anything without him. His word is God, and everything is Rebbe, 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 Rebbe. So you talk about Rebbe, Rebbe, Rebbe. And they say, why isn't that called worshiping a Rebbe? And how can you do such a thing? This is a question a lot of people have. So once you learn more about it and you understand what we're going to talk about now, then it's not even a question. Let me preface it. Let me explain the concept. We should understand it a little bit better. Let's understand, we should understand a little bit better. A person has a pain in their leg. You have a pain in your leg. You go to the doctor and you say to the doctor, doctor, my foot hurts. I have a pain in my foot. Does the doctor come along and say to the head, who gave you a right to speak for your leg? Do you have a power of attorney? Do you have a power of attorney to speak for your leg? Your leg has a pain. Let the leg talk. Who are you to be representing your leg? You don't have a power of attorney. Who gives you the right to do it? So obviously anybody that hears it says that's ridiculous. Why? Because the head and the leg are one entity. It's not, if I want to represent you in court, okay, I need a power of attorney or to represent you in anywhere, anything. If I want to represent you in court, let's say, I need a power of attorney. If I want to represent you in a contract, I need a power of attorney. Why? It's very simple. I am me, you are you. In order for two separate people to represent one another, you need to get permission from that person to represent him. And therefore you need what's called power of attorney. What happens if you don't have a power of attorney? Then you can't represent him. But the leg and the head are not two separate people. They are the same thing. It's one body. One is the head and one is the foot. It's the head of the foot and it's the foot of the head. And if they're one person, then you don't have to get a power of attorney. What is it? You have a pain in the leg. How do you communicate? How can the leg communicate? You can't come to the doctor and just walk into the office and stick up your foot. It's not going to help the doctor in any way. You need to communicate. What is the communicator of the leg? The head is the communicator of the leg. But it's not, God forbid, that the leg and the head are two separate entities and they need a power of attorney one from the next. There's a Rashi in Chumash that Nasi hu akel v'akel nasi. Moshe Rabbeinu, the leader, is everybody. Like it says, Rashi says it's in Chumash. Sometimes it says Moshe sent. Sometimes it said the Jew sent. Which one is it? So Rashi says it's the same thing because Moshe, the Nasi hu akel, the Nasi is the people. What does this mean? The Jewish people are one body in two aspects. Number one, the Alter Rebbe says this in the beginning of Tanya, that from Avram Avinu until our generation is one big body. The earlier generations were the heads. The later generations were the heart and the stomach, and then the feet. And as it says in the Zohar, our generation is called Ikves the Mashiach, meaning the heel right before the coming of Mashiach. Why are we called Ikves the Mashiach? One of the simple explanations of that is because Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov Moshe Rabbeinu were the heads, and then as generations went down, and we are the lowest part of the body. We're the heels right before the coming of Mashiach, because it's one body. The same way, Torah says, it's not only Chassidus, Torah says, the Jewish people are one body. This one body of the Jewish people has a head, has hands, stomach, feet, toenails, and heels. In our generation, every generation, not only generally speaking from the beginning of times to the end of times, as the Jewish people one body, but the reality is every generation, the Jewish people are one body. What does the function, now you have what's called a Rebbe, a Rebbe. Rebbe, besides meaning teacher, Rebbe actually stands for Rosh B'nai Yisrael. Rosh B'nai Yisrael is an acronym for Rebbe. He is the head of the Jewish people. What does it mean he's the head of the Jewish people? The head has different functions to it. The head has a brain. The head has eyes that see, and ears that hear, and a mouth that can speak. Those are the main functions of the head. In every generation, in order to communicate with Hashem, yes, every person davens themselves. We have our own communication with Hashem. But you know something? Every generation has a unique thing that generate the need of what that generation needs. What's needed in our generation is not what was needed in Moshe Rabbeinu's generation. Our generation, the Rebbe explains about the Tetzaveh, the last time the Rebbe edited. The Rebbe said in the previous Rebbe's generation, what they needed in the communist Russia, they needed self-sacrifice for the spreading of fighting underground schools, underground yeshivas, underground mikvahs. They had to have Mesiras Nefesh to death. The Rebbe says, our generation, we don't need that. What do we need? We need not to be complacent in Golus. We need to want to bring Mashiach. We need things like that. Who knows what the generation needs? Who knows what the generation needs in that particular generation at large? The one that has eyes. If I am the foot of our generation, I don't have eyes. I don't know. I can be told to do things and I'll do it. But how do I know what needs to be done? For that, you need eyes. Therefore, in Torah, the scholars are called Einei Ha'eda, the eyes of the community. Einei Ha'eda, in Chumash, you have it many times. Why are they called Einei Ha'eda, the eyes of the community? What do you mean the eyes of the community? Because they see what's needed in this generation. They see what's needed in every individual person. They hear, meaning they have ears. They hear what's going on. They're aware of the world. They're aware of godliness. They're aware of how to connect the two together. And they have a brain that thinks to figure out how to do things. Every generation has a head. And as Rashi says in Chumash, when Moshe was making Yeshua the leader, to follow him after he was passing, Rashi says, there's one leader in a generation, not two. Even in Moshe Rabbeinu's time, you had Moshe, you had Aaron, you had the 12 Nesiim, you had great tzaddikim, but there's one Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is called Reish B'nai Yisrael. And Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jews, to Hashem, speaking about the Jews, when they ask, where's the beef? And Moshe Rabbeinu says, where am I supposed to get beef? Moshe Rabbeinu said to Hashem, Sheish me'es elef ragli ha'am asher anechi b'kibur. I am standing among 600,000 feet of the people. What is the role of Moshe Rabbeinu? The original Moshe Rabbeinu, and we see in Chumash and in Midrashim what Moshe Rabbeinu's function was as the first leader, but it says in the Zohar, there's a Moshe Rabbeinu in every generation. What is Moshe Rabbeinu's function? Moshe Rabbeinu's function, it says in Chumash, and we'll elaborate on it. Moshe Rabbeinu says, I stand between you, the Jews, you and Hashem, to bring you the word of Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu's role is to feed Jews with belief. Every Jew believes in God. Every Jew is what's called, the Medrash says, Ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim. We are all believers, children of believers. I mentioned in the past, somebody once came to the Rebbe and said, Rebbe, I don't believe in God. So the Rebbe said to him, the fact that you said it doesn't mean that you really don't believe in God. Because every Jew believes in Hashem. The fact that you say you don't doesn't take away the fact that you do. Because Teves says you believe in Hashem. But what is the function of Moshe Rabbeinu in every generation? Moshe Rabbeinu's function in every generation is to reveal the belief that every Jew has innately because they're Jewish, or they become Jewish, according to halacha. They have this emunah and faith in Hashem, which causes them to observe Torah mitzvahs. The role of a Rebbe is, as it says, when Hashem told, Moshe Rabbeinu said to Hashem, I'm dying, so Moshe Rabbeinu said to Hashem, you have to appoint another leader. So Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, take your Yeshua, Ish asher ruach bai. He's a man that has a spirit. What does that mean? The Ramban says, from the Medrash, Moshe Rabbeinu, because he's the head and he's the nerve center of the body, every pain in any part of the body is felt in the head. Does that mean that the foot and the head are separate entities? That the foot is worshiping the head when it communicates and when it sees where is it safe to go or where it's not safe to go, where it's dangerous to go? Does that, God forbid, mean that the Jew, that the foot is worshiping the head? Worshipping by definition is when it's a separate entity and you worship them. But if he's in your head, why in the world is there an issue with that? And this is what Teves is about. The Rebbe, because he is one entity with Klal Yisrael, he is the head of us. We are the feet of the Rebbe. So therefore, it's one entity. And therefore, it's not two separate things that, you can have. Okay, why am I worshiping him? Why do I do a thing without him? Because he's our head. And he communicates in us, through us, to us. That's what it's all about. So in other words, you have this concept of, and the guy Teves wanted to separate that issue of Rebbe. It wasn't against Chassidus. It's not against Chassidim. This is the core of what there was a battle against Rebbe. The Rebbe is a private individual. He is not Klal Yisrael. He's a private, and he didn't mean it. He didn't mean it that way. He just wanted to get money from the books, okay? But the fact that down here, there became such a decree to define what the definition of a Rebbe is it the head of Klal Yisrael, or is it a separate personal person, that was brought to court. And what's interesting, what did the court rule? That the Rebbe and Chassidim are the same thing. He's the head of Chassidim. And therefore, when a Jew has a relationship with a Rebbe, it's not, God forbid, that you're going to outsiders for help. Just like the head knows what's best for the foot, a Rebbe knows what's best for each individual person. And therefore, it's explained in, Chassidish Sfardim, so to speak. When you ask a shaila Torah, is something allowed or not? Generally speaking, it's one answer for everybody. You're either allowed to do it on Shabbos or you're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. It's either, what you messed up in the kitchen, it's either kosher or it's not kosher. No matter who you are, you're going to get the same answer. It's either yes or no. When a person asks the Rebbe a question, two people will ask the exact same question and they will get two different answers. Because the Rebbe is not answering the question. The Rebbe is answering the person. And I told this story a few times in this class, but it's very pertinent to bring out this point. I said this story at another Zoom meeting that I had with some people, and it blew their mind. There was a case in LA many years ago of a shidduch, okay, who I was involved in. And they both, the boy and the girl, decided they wanted to marry each other. Okay, so what do Chabad people do? They ask the Rebbe if they should get married. So each one writes separately. And usually, most of the time, the Rebbe answered yes to both or whatever. This person, this boy and the girl, wrote into the Rebbe, they want to get engaged. The boy got an answer yes, get engaged. And the girl got an answer no, don't get engaged. Can you imagine? Same boy and girl. The Rebbe is saying that to the boy, get engaged, and to the girl, he's saying, don't get engaged. So the guy freaked out. He said, how could that be? It's either both no or both yes. I mean, how can I, for me, but I can't get married to her if she doesn't marry me. I mean, like, what is this? He wrote the question into the Rebbe. He said, Rebbe, how did you say what you said? Like, what does that mean? And the Rebbe said to him, don't you understand that a shidduch might be good for one side, but not for the other? Meaning, for you, the Rebbe said to him, the shidduch is good, but it's not good for her. So the Rebbe is, what's the Rebbe doing? So, but obviously they can't get engaged because she's not going to get engaged. And the Rebbe said no. But the Rebbe said, I'm answering you. You asked me a question. For you, this is the answer. It doesn't matter that the answer for her is no. For you, this is a good shidduch. For her, it's not a good shidduch. Because a Rebbe looks into the soul of each person. I'm going to say one more thing. It's getting late already. People marveled. I mean, there's no question. The Rebbe had an unbelievable brain, unbelievable memory beside the kedusha of it. Even Rabbi J.B. Soloveitchik, Yoshever Soloveitchik, was very close with the Rebbe in Europe. They were in Berlin together in university. He said that the Rebbe's memory was phenomenal. Okay? So now, many times, people were not by the Rebbe for 20 years. Right? And they come to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said who they are and spoke to them what was discussed 20 years ago. And people marveled at the Rebbe's memory. The Rebbe sees thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And he remembered somebody from 20 years ago, whatever. But you know what? Perhaps you can say it a little bit different. Yet the Rebbe had a phenomenal memory. When the Rebbe saw a person, he saw neshama. Neshama doesn't age. Neshama doesn't change. The Rebbe looks at a person, he sees the neshama. He's the head. He's our head. He looks at the person, he sees the neshama of the person. And therefore, the Rebbe answers that neshama, what's good for that neshama. And therefore, this was the decree of Teves, that the judge, the Goyish judge in court, in federal court, it wasn't even, it was federal court, because they took the books from Brooklyn to New York to New Jersey, it became automatically a federal case. You imagine, federal is the country. America used to be, not now, I don't know. The superpower of the world, unquestionably. When this happened, America was the superpower of the world. That means the judge, representing the most powerful superpower country of the world, ruled. Can you imagine this? What is a Rebbe? One who is one with the Chassidim. He is their head. And if he is the head, then we are his halavai, the feet. Should only be the feet. So therefore, the Rebbe said, what has to be done from Teves? We need to connect ourselves more to what the Rebbe wants from us, because Teves, it shows that we and the Rebbe are one person. We're the same thing. We have to buy books, like we said. We have to learn more. We have to do more mitzvahs. What did the Rebbe want from us? What did our head want from us? Our head wants from us, very simple, be a better Jew. Not this, God forbid, a bad Jew. All Jews are good. Become a better Jew, learn more, daven more, give more tzedakah, do more mitzvahs, influence others to also do more mitzvahs. This is what Teves is all about. But in the essence of Teves, it was a battle against the Rebbe, not Chassidus, not Chassidim. It was a battle against the definition of a Rebbe. And Teves, the Dan Natzach shows that a Rebbe and Klal Yisrael is one thing. He's our Rebbe, Rabbeinu, our Rebbe. That means he's ours, and we're his. We should be connected. Hashem should help us that from this Teves we should become better. Let's say, I don't want to use the word better. More observant Jews. Do more. As good as we are, we have to become better. That's what the Rebbe said. The Rebbe's model, the whole leadership of the Rebbe's leadership was become a leader. The more you do more. And that's all. Do what you can and do more than what you can. And that's what Teves is about. Shem should help us that through us celebrating Teves and Didan Natzach, we should be victorious over all evil forces of the world. And the Rebbe will take us out of the Golus.